Welcome to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast, where women are magical and empowered. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Monday, psychologist turned transformational feminine business coach. This podcast is for you if you want to prioritize your own pleasure, face your fears, and manifest your desires. This podcast is sponsored by the Fearless Feminine Academy, where I teach women how to turn their trauma into their superpowers. My goal is to show women that we can heal our world by creating time and financial freedom by doing whatever the fuck we want. Are you ready for the Divine Feminine Revolution? Let's get vulnerable and go deep. I'm so honored that you're here. Okay, hello everyone. I am so excited to continue the Fearless Feminine podcast and introduce you to Emdr Brown. She has an amazing history and story. I'll let her kind of go into her brag intro. But like me, we sort of share a mental health background. And so I always love to see all the social justice, mental health warriors coming through to help change society. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself and brag on it.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you, Megan. Thank you for having me. So I'm Amanda J.P. Brown. I'm an author and a transformational coach. I work with women who want to feel more confident in their skin, which doesn't necessarily mean their body. I have a background, like you said, in mental health, specializing in trauma, early childhood trauma, and working with families. I have done so many different things in the world. I've gone through my own struggles, my own trauma experiences, my own struggles with like substance abuse and really working to overcome those. I have an adopted son. I live in Cave Creek, Arizona, on a kind of a ranch part of in Arizona. It's really hot here. I'm really excited to be doing the work that I'm doing and being able to show up and hold space, because one of the things that's so important to me is making sure that we have that safe space to do the work. So I really pride myself on, and I feel like I'm really good. One of my big brags, which I don't know why I'm saying this because nobody will want to work with me after this, but that's not true, is creating such a safe space that women feel comfortable to cry. I've actually been amazed at how many times we start diving into the work and right away they feel so safe. They can talk about their shame stories, which is a lot of what I work on now with women, and releasing that shame that they've been holding on to. And it's just so powerful and such an honor. Like, I'm so honored that they would trust me enough to hold this space. So that's actually a really big brag that I like to talk about, but people are like, cry. I don't want to cry. So
Yeah. Well, in the therapy world, we kind of talk about like you have to feel to heal. And that's kind of my beef with some of the mental health meds is like, I feel like sometimes it disconnects people from their tears, and it's just kind of hard to do the work there. And I love what you said about safety is so huge. It makes me think back to when I was doing my PhD internship. I had a supervisor and he pretty much would just look at my wastebasket and see how many tissues I had. And he'd be like, "Oh, Megan, you're doing some really good work." And the truth of it was, I just had this one girl that would like profusely cry the entire session, and like she would go through like a box of tissues.
That's awesome.
I got props from my supervisor, and I never pull for tears, but I just feel like tears are so healing and transformative, and I just love it so much. So I know we're gonna have an amazing discussion about shame. Brene Brown kind of made it famous, but there's so much work to do in this field.
Absolutely. I think, and that's one of the things I say, how you said, feel to heal, is that you really have to feel your way through this work, and you can't go around it, jump over it, crawl under it. Like, you have to feel through this work in order to really get to that place that you want to be. So yeah, and shame, oh yeah, such a heavy thing, but it's such a powerful thing to be working through. And yeah, I love Brene Brown. She's amazing.
Yeah, and shame, the hardwired response is to hide. And so like a lot of times we hide our story, and even if we're open and vulnerable, we have judgments like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be telling this. It's TMI, or people are going to judge it. And I love that you led with your story. So like, tell us a little bit about kind of your journey to releasing shame and, finding empowerment.
Yeah. So really long period of time because so when I was a teenager, my parents split up, and there was a lot of connection to my dad, and I felt a big, huge parental abandonment and like rejection. So I kind of spiraled out of control in the sense of looking for somebody to love me and fill that place. So I found myself in all the wrong spaces with all the wrong people and ended up in drugs and kind of dropping out of high school, spinning out of control in that arena for a couple years. And then one day I was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. There's got to be more to life. There was that little bit of hope in that space. Hold on, my dogs.
Yeah. They're like kids. They like to steal the show. We were just talking about that as well.
They're little puppies too. I might have to put them out if they keep going. So I really was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. All my relationships were really strained. I was I don't even know where I was living, but I just knew that there had to be something different. And so at the time, right about the time or right after the time I'd had this epiphany, I met somebody who helped me kind of get back on my feet in the sense of like, it was like that instant soul connection with somebody, and he was amazing and a really great guy. Obviously there were problems because I wasn't doing any of the work, but what was really significant is that in the process, my mom, because I didn't have a really good relationship with my mom before I started using drugs because of the connection with how ingrained and almost enmeshed that I was with my dad. So I really kind of did not have a good relationship with her. And even though she tried, I was like, get away from me. You don't understand me. You don't know me. And I really was just struggling. But she was there and she had found this school. And what I did was I never went to therapy. I just kind of quit on my own and didn't do any work except hop back into school. And so I went to school. It was a charter school that was at a community college, so I was able to take college credits, and I really found myself like interested in psychology and really kind of diving into a little bit of that work. So it was a safe, structured environment where I could have that container to just learn and kind of refocus myself. So that's where I spent a lot of years. I ended up there in high school, then I got a scholarship to community college, to college, and then into 2 different master's degrees. But I still never did the work. That relationship ended, and I ended up in this other relationship along the way. And I was really angry and bitter about the first relationship ending. And because I thought I was going to spend my life with this man, I thought that we were going to travel the world together and just live this amazing life. And it did not work out that way. And I wanted nothing to do with him, very similar to the thing with my dad, rejecting everything, but still looking for somebody else. And really, I was looking for somebody else to save me and tell me I was okay. Well, I've learned that doesn't really happen that way. The more that we look to other people, the more that we give away our power. So that relationship was very toxic, very emotionally abusive, leading into that physical abusiveness. And I found myself compromising my values, like not even like knowing who I was, giving away pieces of myself, only taking on what he liked, because I was so insecure and I felt so much shame because I never talked about my substance abuse. And when I did, I was really scared and judged, and sometimes by other people too. So I learned not to talk about it because you would be judged by that. And that was one of the stories that I kind of was like, okay, be silent, don't talk about this. But I wasn't talking about powerful pieces of myself. So I felt this like push-pull thing in the relationship. And then one day I found myself kind of in the same situation going, I don't want to live like this anymore. One of the most powerful places I've found is like, what the fuck is happening to my life? I don't want to live like this anymore. And even though it's like complete chaos and destruction and implosion sometimes, it's also like the most amazing space of creation and like discovery and possibility. I learned in that I had went to a work party shortly after we split up. And it was for me because I'd been at this attorney's office for 5 years. And it was the all-American girl, red, white, and blue, apple pie and ice cream. I'm like, who is this party for? Because it is not me. I'm not that wholesome girl. I've had all this like stuff. Nobody knows me. And it was that moment that I realized nobody knew me because I wasn't showing up in my power. I wasn't showing up as who I was. So I vowed never to do that again, but I still didn't do any work. And so even though I was more aware to some degree, I ended up in another relationship and not as much giving away, but still there were those compromises, those, oh, you like that, I like that too. Even if I like all these other things, I've discovered that I get enjoyment and joy from doing things other people enjoy in relationships, but that doesn't mean that I love them as much as that person does. I just love being with them when they're happy. Um, but in that process, in this relationship, which is the relationship I'm in now, um, 6 years after we actually wasn't six, it was like 4 or 5 years later, I was like, I want to do a bikini competition. I want to get healthier. I want to get fitter. I want to feel powerful in my body. I want to love myself. And I ended up finding this coach who was like a mind body fitness coach and did like also this piece of business. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care about the business, but I'm totally into the fitness part. And of course I'm into mindset because at that time I was already a therapist. So I was like, okay, cool. And I had no idea where this journey would take me, but that really was the start of a lot of my like getting back into that physical piece. Actually opened up the mindset piece because it allowed me to work through some of what I was feeling. Like part of my journey that I totally skipped over, but I think it's really important, is when I left the boyfriend, the first one, and was kind of bitter about that, I ended up finding martial arts. And so I started studying martial arts, and it was so powerful for me to be able to physically release some of what I was going through. And I think that's what a lot of like being able to cry is like this physical release, this release of holding on to things so tightly and clenched that it's just like, oh, we can't do it anymore. So that is what like boxing and martial arts was for me. But that was also what I reconnected with when I started doing weight training. And then the journey just kind of kept going. I kept digging in. I kept doing some work, little bits here and there, finding books and mentors and coaches and going to retreats. And then voila, I'm here.
That's amazing. And there's so many bits of your story that I want to touch on. One piece is, I think with substance use, a lot of times I've been through this journey myself, like, highly sensitive people, empaths, if you had some of that like enmeshment codependency, like early on, like I think those are all setups to experiment with drugs. And a lot of people don't get out of the experimentation phase. They get like stuck in it. And I've definitely lost some friends to drug addiction. And it's like so tragic. Talk about like a rescuer at heart who can't rescue someone. It's just like the worst feeling ever. But that's the hard thing about substance abuse. When people get really deep into it, like it kind of does have to be their decision to stop it. But I do think that like empaths are feeling so much that it's kind of like a natural self-medication thing. And I think there's so much like shaming that goes on around substance abuse. And I think it's kind of interesting for me to see with mental health, like actually like hallucinogens and ecstasy and some other like recreational drugs, ketamine, are like becoming the big treatments for trauma. And so I've had a handful of clients do those treatments. I've done some of those things recreationally back when I was a teenager. And it's like we're all searching for something. And I was actually at like a brain science symposium, and they were talking about how, like, he used the metaphor that like our current mental health meds, especially like the antipsychotics, mood
Mhm.
stabilizers, and some of those like more intense ones are like basically like painkillers,
Yep.
but things like they're finding with some of these like more psychedelically,
Yep.
oriented ones are
Yep.
more like antibiotics. I know some people feel bad
Yeah.
with antibiotics, but they actually create like permanent change, was the idea.
Yes. Yeah, that's I just was actually one of the classes I'm with, like, trainings I'm doing, but by Bessel van der Kolk
Yeah.
is, The Body Remembers, is he talks about that and, like, MDMA and the research that they're doing on vets, and I was, like, fascinating, and he talked about it's, like, opens up this whole, and it's really kind of more of the plant medicine type stuff, but then using the psychedelics, um, and really like the long lasting changes, that's what he was talking about, that it's having on the brain, that like Prozac and those can help as a band-aid, but they don't have any long term, and actually after an extended use can create more issues because you're still struggling with what you were struggling with. Yeah, it's really interesting because it kind of opens your mind about what we should actually be doing for ourselves and where we should let go of some of that social judgment
Yeah.
of what that means. So,
Another big passion of mine is like I've worked the retreat circuit like you as well. And I'm lucky to have a local healing center, Gypsy Hands, and they have a lot of indigenous healers, like some of the
mhm,
healers from New Zealand
yep,
come in. And so like I've not professionally done this, but personally done a lot of like body work, and their sort of view of it is that like the trauma gets locked in the body, and like
yep,
Bessel
absolutely,
obviously would agree with that, but I don't think
totally.
it's quite mainstream psychology. And so when people say like, oh, therapy didn't work for me, one, I mean, maybe they didn't have the best therapist, and two, like
True.
it can be so heady. And I think with trauma,
Right.
like you can understand something, but something can be locked in your emotions and in your body, and I think that's
Yeah,
where people like lean on substance use or
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree because it does get like a lot, and some people have trauma before language,
oh
and
yeah,
so, like,
talk about
that
that.
is, like, a whole different thing, like, you can't even describe what you're going through, and really in traumatic experiences, you move out of your thinking brain into a very primitive part of your brain that doesn't have language, and it doesn't have those things, so absolutely, you can't really access language or thinking in that moment, and you really need somebody to help you through that experience, and it is a really experiential thing. Absolutely would agree with you on that 100%, because we can't talk our way through it. In fact, sometimes we're actually re-traumatizing people when we use talk therapy
Mhm.
to work through trauma, because they're re-experiencing it every time, and they're getting caught in like that loop, that trauma loop, where is that body work and those things. And I've it's funny that you've done indigenous healing work, so have I, with healers. And I was just at one last night. I'm super excited about the possibility of doing some more stuff with him. So um it's just so powerful how sometimes we can't talk our way through things, and we really need to access other parts of our body and our brain, and things that don't have language accessibility.
Yeah, I've been an EMDR therapist, which
Mm,
is like just really fabulous for treating trauma. And I feel like the reason why it works is because it is brain based, but I feel like it really does clear like the emotions and the
mhm,
body in a way that traditional talk therapy doesn't do, because I think it like in my mind it balances the hemispheres, and depending if you're more right brain or left brain dominant, like it balances whichever one. It either helps you put the logical story around it, or it helps you like get in touch with the emotions to like kind of clear it. And so I feel like that in itself is an energy work, and that's why I love it so much. Even though it is mainstream psychology, like I do feel like it has a little bit of magic to it, and that's why I love using it. And I've helped so many people clear like abuse and trauma and some really like horrific things using it. I've actually been like cheating and doing a little like mindset work with it, like on the slow speed to like really like anchor into these beliefs and clear some of my like rejection, abandonment trauma. So if anyone's listening and you have trauma and you do, want to go to a therapist, like I would definitely highly recommend an EMDR therapist, or like, it sounds like you've done somatics. I think
Yeah.
somatic therapy is really huge.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree, because sometimes, and finding the right therapist, I think you hit on something so important. Not all therapists are good therapists. I'm not saying that they're horrible, but they're not all working in their most powerful place. And
Mhm.
so if you have a bad experience with one therapist, that doesn't mean the next therapist is going to be that way too. And I really had to work through that as well. I had my own not so great therapy experience, and I was really resistant to therapy for a very long time because I was a therapist, and I'm like, I don't want to go to a bad therapist. Um, and so I really feel like, yeah, absolutely, the EMDR, somatic work, that's all really powerful, and just finding somebody who's the right fit for you, that you really feel that you can feel safe with. Because if you don't feel safe, it's really sometimes challenging. Although Bessel was talking about it, and he's like, yeah, this guy was so upset with me, and he's like, I don't know, but whatever he did in the work that he was doing, and I think he was doing EMDR, he's like, it still made a difference. And this story, that he didn't need to hear this guy's story for the work to work, and I think that's really important. So yeah,
Yeah,
love
and that is
EMDR.
kind of amazing with it. Like you can just call up the memory, which is really good if there's like shame pieces where people just really don't feel like they can talk about it
Yeah.
in the moment. Tell us about safety, because I think that is like one of the most important constructs. And I remember a therapist friend of mine, Tamara, she would always say like, I'm feeling unsafe. And I'm like, well, I've not heard that like as an adjective. And then like creating safety, I feel it's kind of like self-care, like at least in the programs I was in, they like laid it on thick about self-care, but they never actually talked about like what it is or how to do it and how to make it a priority. It was just like a should, like, oh yeah, you should do self-care, like you should feel safe. And so I think it's kind of like the water for the fish kind of thing. It's like the container we're in. And so sometimes it's kind of invisible.
Yeah, it is invisible because um it's like, so I have a story more than an actual definition, because I think
Perfect.
this really showcases this. Is like, so when I got into the relationship I'm in now, I was in there for 6 years, and actually then we got married. So 7 years into this relationship, and I was still just unpacking the work and really just rediscovering and reconnecting and reclaiming all of the pieces of myself I'd like disowned and rejected out of my own shame, and the thought that, well, if I'm this, then this person won't love me, like all of those beliefs that we have, and my fear of rejection, and trying to like show up as, who they want me to be versus who I am. So I finally was in this place that I was discovering, reconnecting, and repiecing, kind of coming back into wholeness. And we were having, me and my husband were having a lot of like struggle and tension. I mean, we still go through stuff sometimes now, because I am a different person than I was 13 and a half years ago when we met. And so it's kind of like this whole like adjustment period, so, which is ongoing. So it doesn't go away necessarily. But I realized that I had to have a conversation with him about who I was, and that I basically started the conversation of, I bet you think I lied to you about who I was. And he was like, yeah, they do. Because you're not that girl that I met 7 years ago who loved going to car shows and loved doing all the things that I love doing. And I'm like, Dad, like, this is where like the vulnerability, the courage, the bravery, all of that stuff, you have to tap in. And I was like, it's not that I lied to you, it's that I'm finally feeling safe enough to tell you and to share with you. And I think that it's really hard to say it'll happen at this time, because everybody's journey is a little bit different in our personal experience. So for me, it was like being able to show up with other people who were accepting me as I was, without any like idea of what I should be. And it was me also allowing myself to take off the masks, to shed the shame, like the shoulds, the conditions, and really kind of going, this is who I am, and me getting comfortable. So part of the safety is kind of finding somebody to hold that space for you that you trust enough to do the work, and then you trusting yourself enough to get comfortable with it yourself, so then you can take it into the next kind of uncomfortable space. So it's this like evolving process. But really for me, creating safety for my clients is really about being okay with them sharing anything they want to. And I say okay, it's like how I've become that is really kind of doing my own work and becoming okay with my own story. And I think part of one of the lessons that I've learned for going through the experience of substance abuse and shame is that it made me more compassionate to people who make decisions about their life that quote unquote may not have been the best or may have been bad, like what those judgments. And that really being able to understand that how people can go through and decide what they decide, and it doesn't make them wrong or bad, it makes them trying to heal and trying to numb some pain or trying to like do the best they can. So really I just go, okay, you can show up as you are and show up in this space to be who you are in a completely vulnerable and authentic way. And so when I can get into that space that you can tell me whatever you need to tell me, and I have been with some people who've told me some really like amazing things that they've been holding on to so tightly. It's such an honor to witness them, but really in that you can show up as you are, and I can witness you without any judgment about that. And that means I have had to do a lot of my own like work as well, or even awareness around what judgments I may have, because even though as a therapist I wasn't necessarily doing my personal work, I was really aware of the judgments that I had about other people, and really kind of tried to unpack that and go, is that really what that means, or is that just like this perception that I've been taught, and now how do I unravel that so I can show up for this person really powerfully so they can show up for themselves.
There's kind of a joke like in the psychology world that like research is me search, which I think is kind of fun. And when we were talking about like good and bad, like I feel like there's I mean, obviously those are judgments, you know, even if we tend to like the good judgments over the bad ones. But you know, I do think like when you're selecting like a healer, a coach, a therapist, whatever, you know, you really can only take people as far as you've gone yourself. And so like so nice to see like a mirror of like I'm so excited to see like that kind of like indigenous or shamanic work or energy work or whatever you want to call it filter into psychology. And I've seen like Reiki sort of come into like the hospital settings. Mindfulness obviously is a big thing, and so I'm like really excited for it to get like full force. And I feel like in general, like one of the biggest things I work with people is like developing their intuition, developing their self-trust. Because if you don't have self-trust, you know, you don't have anything. And so I think when you're creating safety, I see a lot of people who come into my office and they're like, Megan, my life is like the best it's ever been. Happily married. I've got a good job. I've got kids, whatever. And all of this old stuff is coming up. And it's like you finally created the safety of the container to be able to do the work. And so it's like kind of bad timing because you're like, I'm happy for the first time ever, but I'm not happy. So.
Yes, you're so right. I mean, that's like a beautiful thing because you need that container for yourself. And self-trust is like so important. There were so many times that I didn't trust myself. I would ask other people, well, what do you think? And what do you think I should do? And are you sure I should do that? And what about this? And how about that? And like, literally my mom was probably sick of talking to me for hours at a time. And I would like, just be like, I don't know, this and that. And she's like, you're going to make the right decision. I'm like, no, I'm not. I mean, I even got into a relationship because once I left my ex-husband, I ended up in another relationship because everybody else liked him, but I didn't really like him. And he was a good person. And obviously, but I was like, oh, everybody else says he's nice. And I've made so many bad judgments. I obviously don't know how to pick good guys. I was like, every time it was like, so, and really like learning that self-trust and that intuition is so powerful because it will help steer us if we allow ourselves to be guided, and it'll really help support us and not drive us down the wrong path. Because I think that's what the fear is, right? The fear is that, for me, I can't pick the guy that I like because I'll obviously end up down this path. So I'm going to try this guy who everybody else is a really nice guy, but I literally can't stand to be around.
Yeah. And I think that's like the legacy of like gaslighting. If you've had like emotional abuse or just like even invalidation can be really sneaky. And I think it's just so like transparent in our culture. It's like, no, you don't get to feel that way. Well, it's your feeling. You can feel whatever you want. Right?
Absolutely. I have to work. I'm like, I constantly working on that with my son because I'm aware of it. And I'm like, oh yeah, you can be mad at me if you want to. Like, I literally have to like restate it because even though I'm frustrated in the moment, like I want to validate his experience as well. And it's like, it's okay to be angry about things in our lives. Like, it's a natural emotion. And I think, I talk a lot with my clients who, in the work that I've done as a therapist, sometimes we don't know how to be with emotions because our parents didn't know. And it's not to blame anyone, but their parents might have not have known. And so there's this generational thing that comes through of we learn to parent by our parents and without being actually taught how to parent. And so we come up with all this stuff and we might not know how to be with certain emotions or, because of how they were. And it's just becoming aware of that and then really kind of rediscovering what do we want to be with and how do we want to learn how to be with this.
Yeah, I love that you brought up kids because I really believe that, kind of starting with our generation, like I feel like we sort of had these like, psychic, sometimes they call them like indigo kids come through that were like going to be the change makers. And then I feel like this younger generation is like that times, a million, and they have like these superhuman gifts and they've got such deep feelings. And I can see even like kids that are like maybe high school or college age now, I feel like sometimes they are feeling so much that we judge them because they're not functioning, but literally they've just sponged up so much emotion that
Yep.
other people have disowned that they literally like are not able to function. And so, I remember just, like a really classic example is like, when they like fall down and hurt themselves and then they look to you to see if they're okay. And most people are like, you're okay. And I remember this one time my daughter was like, no, I'm not okay. Like it hurts. And so I've kind of taught her to say like, I have big feelings and just own
No,
it.
that's good.
And then it cues me to go like, if I'm like, suck it up essentially, like, or I'm like, you're okay, you're fine, like, let's move on, and she says, I have big feelings. I'm like, oh, okay. She's still processing, like, slow down.
Yeah. No,
10.
I love that you do that because one of the things that just came to mind to me is when I was learning therapy and stuff like that, how powerful our parents' reactions are to us and whether it even like we could not be feeling scared. And if our parents are like, then we get scared because, and part of that is like the attachment relationship. We are wired to survive with our attachment person. So if our attachment person is like fearful about something we're doing, we learn to be scared of doing that. And so if our parents weren't able to regulate their own emotion when we were doing something like there's that whole, you call it the circle of security, that exploration and that coming back in, if they weren't okay with us exploring, then that we might not want to go out and do those things. And if they had a problem with us when we got scared, needing to come back in and get reassurance, then we might not be okay getting comfort from other people. So there's this, sometimes what I kind of say is our parents never meant to teach us the things that they sometimes did. It's really just like, they might not have known. So the fact that you're really aware and then you can kind of like, okay, like work with this with her is so powerful because I try to do the same thing with my son. And it really does require me to like really be present and aware of what I'm doing. And it's really hard sometimes because sometimes I'm like, I just want to be like, stop doing that and do what I say because I said so. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's not cool.
I know. Talk about like some hypervigilance to be a therapist all these years and then to actually become a parent. It's like, oh.
Yeah. Everything you know is out the window sometimes.
That whole like we're all victims of victims or like, hurt people, like very true. And like parenting is like a 24-hour job. So I definitely, feel for parents. And, I think that like it's inevitable you're going to make mistakes. And so the crucial part between like toxic versus like healthy is just saying like, mommy just had a meltdown. Like, let's talk about it. What was it like for you? Were you scared? Like, what can you do to calm down? Like, and so we have like a therapy debriefing session after incidents, because incidents are going to happen, right? I just want to normalize that for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's so important. I do the same thing. Like, okay, you come back later and that repair, in the sense of debriefing, repair, kind of acknowledge, because that's something also your kids learn too, right? How to do that for in their own relationships. But it is sometimes we are triggered by our children, and we are like, oh, so there's this whole thing that we go through that if we weren't parents we wouldn't understand, because we're not having that type of relationship. But absolutely, I think that repair piece is important, in being able to regulate ourselves and helping our kids regulate and learning how to do this, um, because they're going to be taking this to their relationships. And I tell my son all the time, and I've told my husband, I'm like, I don't know if we're making the right decision. Like, I won't know for like 20 more years, because some of what the decisions that I'm making, I think I'm doing the best that I can, but I don't know if it's the right decision, because I'm just going to have to trust that it is. And then we're going to just have to see what happens. So some of that is just that self-trust again, like trusting you're making the right decision in the moment, and it's going to be okay. And you can change your mind. That's what's great. We can make a new decision tomorrow.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I was talking to a healer friend of mine, and she was pointing out that sometimes like in spiritual communities we'll say like as a soul you choose your parents, and she was kind of saying that like more like you choose like the ancestral line that you're coming from, and that particular energy, not necessarily like the events or like the damage maybe that's going to be done. And then some of us are ambitious in our choices, and then we get born into a situation. And having been done trauma work for so long, I do see this real phenomenon of, I don't know if the trauma like created the healer, or if like a healer just got dropped in the middle of like a big traumatic situation. But we know that like trauma like rewires the brain to be more psychic, more intuitive, more healer. And I think talking about like kind of losing yourself, I've struggled with this, and I've seen lots of clients do it too, like into codependency. And it's like a little more than codependency. It's just that like you're so like empathic or intuitive that like everybody else's needs are so clear, distracting you away from your own needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been one of my struggles sometimes, is like just really kind of seeing all the things from other people, and then really kind of having to work on going, what do I need? What do I need in this moment? What do I need? To even do that introspection piece is huge, or to say, is this what I need right now? It's funny because sometimes we think we know, but we don't want to check in. And then, but even moving out of our head and into I do this a lot with my clients, of helping them move from the head into the heart, and then like asking the heart, what do you need right now? And it's amazing that we really know. We're just not trusting it, or not wanting to look at it. But that is actually too been one of the things that I've struggled with, is worried about everybody else's needs, making sure they feel good, making sure this, and really not staying in my power or staying in what I need. Because in the work with kids, we talk about it as you have to give from the overflow, like it's the empty cup syndrome. If you keep pouring from your cup and you're not filling your cup up first, meaning yourself with self-care or nourishment or whatever it is, you're going to eventually have an empty cup that you're trying to give from, and you're not going to be able to be as available to people, because you're literally starving for yourself, and you're struggling. And I feel like sometimes my cup has even been cracked when I just keep giving, giving, giving. And then there's the burnout and the frustration and the emotional breakdowns that we have, because we haven't given, taken, and we haven't taken the time. And sometimes we don't know how to do that. And it's okay to not know, and just and to sit and go, I don't even know what I need, but I know I need something different.
That's kind of what happened to me in my private practice, having done so much trauma work and then just the hustle of a brick and mortar business. I really started to burn out from like empathic overload or compassion fatigue. That's
Yeah.
really, I've been doing healing work all along the way. I couldn't have made it this long without the healing work. But then I really got into coaching, and particularly what I really liked was pleasure-based coaching or pleasure-based business or even pussy-based
Yeah.
business. And I think it's about like where we might say like listen to our heart. We can also say like listen to her because she knows she's the creator kind of moment. But I feel like pleasure is such, we talk about self-care or self-soothe and psychology, but I feel like pleasure is even like a little bit more, and it's not just sexual pleasure. It's just like joy, happiness, fulfillment, satisfaction. And I feel like it's the missing ingredient. And if you've had trauma, I feel like that it's so easy to just like kind of jump out of your body, especially if we're using like substances to do so, either prescription or, non-prescription. I feel like pleasure is something really simple. Like it could be just like stroking your hair or like taking a deep breath or taking a bath or whatever it is. And I feel like it's so powerful. So I just wanted to kind of like bounce that to you around like, people want to get rid of fear. And, my brand is like the fearless feminine. Fear is not going away, right? It's just like, how can you dance with it or like pleasure yourself through it? So what do you have to say about that? And what's your vision for the future?
Okay, perfect. So I love that you said dance with it, because I think that is one of the ways we experience so much joy is through complete release. And I completely agree with you. There's not enough sometimes pleasure in our own lives. And there's a lot of judgment around feeling pleasure and to feel, think about, oh, don't brag about that because, it's not nice. Like we have all these stories that we have been told and trained. So really kind of this feeling amazing in our body and in our lives has kind of been downplayed, especially as women. That's a whole nother part of the conversation. So the pleasure is like so important. And I think that one of the things that sometimes I've even struggled with is allowing pleasure to come into my life and really just going, okay, this is pleasurable. And you're giving myself permission to feel this way. It's really about that permission. I can't give it to anyone else, but I can give it to myself. We're not, and so it's really being able, it's kind of like that vulnerable piece of like, it's okay to be pleasured. It's okay to feel pleasure. It's okay to dance in the rain naked if that's what you want to do. Like, and it feels good. Like, who's to say we're not allowed to do this? And if they do, why do they get that power? When we do that, we're giving them our power. So absolutely, I completely agree in finding our pleasure.
I think with empaths, like sometimes we're like trying to fix the environment so that we'll be okay. That's way overcomplicating it. Like literally we can just say, I'm going to prioritize my own pleasure. And like, I was just thinking like, okay, I'm sitting like this and it's kind of uncomfortable. Like what can I do to just feel better? Even 5%, even 1%, even, like a little bit better in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. As empaths, there's so much, we're absorbing so much from the environment that sometimes we have to remember we can radiate out into the environment. So it's as much as we take on, we can shift out. It's just learning to how to be with ourselves to kind of work and then create that for ourselves in some.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I actually had a friend who was in massage school and she talked about that they talked about like pushing versus pulling. And so like I think a lot of us who are in feminine energy, I know I'm like a puller, like I receive what on a lot of different levels, like what's happening with the person. And that's why I can like hold such great space. But like maybe and I think women, we get messages around like being pushy.
Right.
But what they really need is like for us to like push out this beautiful, positive healing energy.
Right. Yeah, I definitely feel that. And really kind of like if we think of the feminine as the ocean who's coming in and out, sometimes we're coming in and leaning in, but there are other times that we're pulling out and giving space to the other person to be, but that doesn't mean we're taking that on. So there's that, that learning that our sacred boundaries of where we begin and where others end is really, really important, of being able to hold our own space too and be able to feel without shutting down, because I think that that's really important too.
I
Absolutely.
love that so much. And I love the ocean. So that's like a beautiful metaphor. I really like, I felt that deeply. So I love your energy. Like, I'm so
Oh,
excited
you're
for therapists to infiltrate the coaching
yeah.
world. And I'm excited to merge it with healing and the
Me
shamanic work. I mean, this, I think, is like the revolutionary moment where I think we're finally honoring that just because we can't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I think that's the
too.
magic of like the feminine energy coming forward. So tell us, like, how do we find you? What are your offers? How do we work with you?
You can find me. I'm on Facebook, Amanda JP Brown. That is probably where my big medium is. Also on Instagram, also Amanda JP Brown. Website, amandajpbrown.com. I am actually just getting ready to launch out a 5-day The Brave Unbecoming challenge. And so it's all about releasing and shedding off all the shoulds and the conditions and the layers of bullshit that have been like piled onto you so you can just embody and be everything that you already are. That is starting September 3rd, and so I'm really excited about that, to be sharing that as a challenge to kind of, it's going to have some activities that you can do to get into that pleasure space for yourself, and also do some kind of work around what are those stories and kind of just discovering what releasing and uncovering. So I'm just super excited about it. So that's The Brave Unbecoming, and you can find that on Facebook.
Yeah, and I put a link to your ebook, which is also about bravery. And I think it's so amazing because I think so much of that is like telling our story. I mean, talk about like Indigenous, that's like something that we did before we wrote things down, was like the oral tradition of storytelling. And so much of what we construct as normal through the media is toxic. And so to like recreate a narrative that's based on like honoring our humanity, like struggles and all, I feel like it's so empowering because it just gives permission for people to just be who they are. And I feel like that's the ticket to like a safe, inclusive, equitable society, is we take care of everybody and we just let them do their things, right?
Absolutely. I think that everything that we're desiring to be in the world is already within us. It's just us like digging through the mud and unearthing that really, and kind of really allowing ourselves to embody it. So it's already there. If you're feeling it, it's there. It's just kind of shedding off that doesn't need to be there anymore.
Love that so much. And I love your energy. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast
Thanks for
today.
having
And I just feel very kindred with you. So
me
I'm
too.
excited to hear your story and, and so much of, I think, what's wrong with our society is shame based. And so
Yeah, I agree.
shame, which is kind of funny because shame is like really like, we think something's wrong with us when it's not. And okay, so it's like, it's like boop, 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 like all the different layers of it. But I think the more that we can come out of the closet with who we are, the real us, it's
Yeah,
so liberating. And that's where we get like magnetic and we just like
yeah,
are in our purest, highest energy. And it's not
absolutely.
about like having your shit all together. It's about, just really authentically like being who you are.
No, I feel like when you project this image of having all your shit together, you're kind of like the Stepford Wives. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. Everything's good. Life is great. But really, you're like, I'm fucking falling apart. And really, like, so really being able to be free enough to just be like, here is who I am. And either you love me or you don't. And that doesn't mean anything about me, because I'm okay with me. I am good with me. And so that's really powerful.
So powerful. Oh my gosh, what a great way to end. Well, thank you so much, and we'll stay connected.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Divine Feminine Revolution podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Want to keep the conversation flowing? Find us on Facebook at the Divine Feminine Revolution Facebook group, where revolutionary women gather to listen to their hearts, monetize their gifts, and change the world.